The theory of planned behavior is a conceptual framework designed to predict how human intention translates into actual action. Researchers use it to map the cognitive steps we take before making a decision. The standard pathway is straightforward. A person's behavioral, normative, and control beliefs inform their attitude, their subjective norms, and their perceived behavioral control. Collectively, these form an intention, which finally leads to the behavior itself. We need to look closely at perceived behavioral control, or PBC. This specific variable was added to the framework to account for situations where people lack complete volitional control over their actions. But measuring PBC has exposed a severe empirical anomaly. When researchers use survey instruments to measure it, the results show wildly varying alpha coefficients, a statistical metric used to measure the internal consistency and reliability of a set of survey items. These scores range anywhere from 0.61 to 0.90, with a mediocre average of 0.65 across meta-analyses. Treating perceived behavioral control as a simple, unitary variable without mapping its internal structure creates methodological chaos. It introduces noise into the data and degrades the predictive validity of behavioral studies. This conceptual ambiguity and low internal consistency occur because researchers arbitrarily mix two distinct concepts within their survey questionnaires. The first component is self-efficacy. This deals specifically with the perceived ease or difficulty a subject associates with performing a given behavior. This table from the research literature shows how self-efficacy is actually measured. The questions ask things like, "I believe I have the ability to," or ask the subject to rate an action from very difficult to very easy. The second component is controllability. This deals with the beliefs that the ultimate performance of the behavior is entirely up to the actor. Questions here ask, "How much personal control do you feel you have?" Or, "Whether or not I do this is entirely up to me." Exploratory and confirmatory factor analyses, statistical methods used to identify underlying relationships between measured variables, consistently prove these are two clearly separable constructs. They are not the same thing. They also behave differently when run through regression equations. Self-efficacy reliably accounts for variance in a person's intentions. Controllability rarely predicts intentions, but it is highly effective at predicting the actual execution of the behavior. Indiscriminately blending these two divergent pathways into a single unweighted survey metric destroys the internal consistency of the research instrument. When researchers attempt to separate these two concepts in their studies, they often make a specific error in their assumptions. To understand the error, we have to look at locus of control. This is the degree to which people believe that they, rather than external forces, have control over the outcome of events. Internal factors include things like personal skill, effort, and willpower. External factors involve task demands, luck, or the actions of other people. This matrix plots how these ideas intersect. The pervasive professional misconception occurs when researchers mistakenly equate self-efficacy exclusively with internal factors. Consequently, those same researchers mistakenly assume controllability exclusively with external factors. This division sounds logically sound on paper. Stating, "I have the necessary skill," intuitively feels like an efficacy statement rooted in the self. Stating, "The task is too demanding," feels like a lack of external control. But this logically sounding division is an empirical fallacy. It directly contradicts the mechanics of Eisen's theory of planned behavior, as well as Bandura's original social cognitive theory. Eisen argues that the perceived ease or difficulty of performing a behavior is conceptually independent of whether the barriers are internal or external. We can test this assumed independence empirically by looking at a specific behavioral goal, eating a low-fat diet. In the efficacy and internal quadrant, a subject might find eating a low-fat diet easy because they have taken the time to familiarize themselves with the fat content of various foods. But look at the efficacy and external intersection. A subject might also find the diet easy simply because low-fat foods happen to be readily available in their local cafeteria. This proves efficacy is not bound to internal traits. It can exist purely due to external facilitation. Moving to controllability and internal, A subject may feel they have limited control over sticking to the diet because they possess little personal willpower. And finally, controllability and external. A subject may feel they have limited control because the dining hall provides absolutely no nutritional information about the meals served. Both efficacy and controllability can be driven by either internal or external factors. Making a priori assumptions about their locus guarantees invalid survey design. The theory of planned behavior is concerned only with people's expectations regarding the sheer presence of requisite resources or the likelihood of encountering obstacles. Whether a resource is internal, like personal skill, or external, like money, time, or the cooperation of others, is completely immaterial to the theory. In Bandura's foundational work on self-efficacy, homeless individuals rated their own efficacy heavily based on external factors, specifically their perceived ability to get other people to help them. Respondents might think of internal factors when asked about efficacy, but that is an empirical question requiring rigorous testing, not a theoretical certainty to be assumed up front. The critical psychometric issue is whether the respondent perceives a factor as facilitating or impeding their action, regardless of its geographic origin inside or outside the self. If efficacy and controllability are distinct and separable factors, does that invalidate perceived behavioral control as a unitary concept? Think of it like general intelligence. We can reliably distinguish between analytical and verbal types of intelligence, but they still usefully combine into a higher-order concept of overall intelligence. This diagram illustrates Eisen's formal solution, a two-level hierarchical model that embraces both unity and distinct separation. At the top level, perceived behavioral control acts as the overarching superordinate latent variable, a hidden concept inferred from directly measured variables. At the middle level, it is comprised of two clearly separable, but correlated, lower-level components of self-efficacy and controllability. At the bottom level are individual, carefully selected survey items that serve as indicators feeding into these specific components. This hierarchical framework resolves the psychometric ambiguity. It proves that self-efficacy and controllability are neither incompatible with nor independent of each other. Behavioral researchers designing new studies can translate this theoretical hierarchy into concrete, actionable steps. The data shows that adapting a few arbitrarily selected questions from prior investigations without verifying their specific structural alignment produces noisy, unreliable data. Instead, researchers must conduct thorough formative research. They must purposefully select items that independently and accurately assess both self-efficacy and controllability. This structural approach has dual utility. Depending on the investigation's purpose, researchers can choose to aggregate all items into a single highly reliable overall index. Alternatively, if the study requires finer granularity, researchers can keep the constructs distinct and enter them as separate indices into a multiple prediction equation. Abandoning the locus of control fallacy and adopting this deliberate item selection process is the only way to guarantee high internal consistency in the data. By accurately mapping and measuring the specific frictions between intention and action, researchers can build reliable models capable of truly predicting human behavior.